The morning sky hung low with heavy clouds, as though even the heavens themselves were preparing to mourn. A cold wind swept through the small town cemetery on the outskirts of the capital, rustling the flags that lined the road. Every banner bore the stars and stripes, each one standing tall as a symbol of sacrifice, of honor, and of a legacy carved in blood and tears. Yet, amidst all the grandeur, one man walked slowly along the gravel path, with a small child clinging to his hand, his head bowed under a burden heavier than the old duffel bag slung across his shoulder. His name was Daniel Carter. Once he had worn the proud uniform of his country, serving tours overseas that few civilians could even begin to imagine. He had stood in deserts where the sun burned his skin, in cities where every corner threatened an ambush, in jungles where the air was thick with danger and silence. But those days were behind him now. What remained was not medals, not ceremonies, not parades, but scars that would never heal and memories that haunted his nights. What remained was a single child, his daughter Lily, whose wide eyes and innocent smile were the only reason he dragged himself out of bed each morning. Daniel was a single father. Life had not been kind to him since returning home. His wife, unable to cope with the man who returned from war, a man broken, quiet, carrying ghosts, had left. She left Daniel with Lily, who was barely 3 years old at the time. And though the days had been long and the nights cruel, Daniel had never given up on her. She was his world now. She was the light in the endless tunnel of his existence. But being a single father wasn't easy. Between small jobs, odd shifts, and the constant struggle to keep food on the table, life often felt like a battle he was destined to lose. Still, he endured, because that's what soldiers did. They endured. But today wasn't about him. Today was about a man who had once stood as a father figure to him, long before life had torn everything apart. General William Harris. The name alone carried weight, echoing across generations of soldiers. To the world, Harris was a decorated hero, a man who had commanded respect and earned every star on his shoulder. But to Daniel, Harris was something more. He was the man who had once pulled him from the brink of despair on the battlefield. He was the man who had told him that courage was not just about facing bullets. It was about facing life after the war. Harris had been more than a general. He had been a mentor, a protector, a quiet guardian who had seen something in Daniel when Daniel couldn't see anything in himself. When Daniel heard of the general's passing, it was like losing a second father. He knew he had to be there to pay his respects, to stand one final time in honor of the man who had given him hope. Even if his uniform was gone, even if the medals he had earned were locked away in a dusty box, even if the world had forgotten his name, Daniel would not forget Harris. And so he walked, his daughter Lily skipping at his side in her little blue dress, clutching a flower she had picked along the way. She didn't fully understand the weight of the day, but she understood enough. "Is this the man who helped you, Daddy?" she asked softly, looking up at him with eyes too wise for her years. Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He was the bravest man I ever knew." The cemetery gates loomed ahead, tall iron bars polished and guarded by soldiers in pristine dress uniforms. The crowd inside was large: senators, generals, admirals, dignitaries, and families dressed in black. Black cars lined the road, each carrying people of power and influence. Daniel felt small as he approached, his boots worn thin, his jacket patched and faded. He didn't belong in that world anymore. He knew it. But still he had to try. As they reached the entrance, 2 guards stepped forward. Their faces were stone, their posture rigid. "Invitation, sir," one of them asked firmly. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I don't have an invitation. I served under General Harris. He was like a father to me. I just came to pay my respects." The guards exchanged a glance, unmoved. "This is a private funeral, sir. Entry is restricted to family, dignitaries, and invited personnel." "I understand," Daniel said quickly, desperation leaking into his voice. "But I'm not just anyone. Harris, he saved my life. I owe him everything. Please, I just want to stand at the back, nothing more." The guard shook his head. "Without clearance, I can't let you through. Orders are orders." Lily tugged at her father's hand, confused. "Daddy, why won't they let us in?" Her little voice pierced Daniel's chest like a knife. She looked up at the guards with innocent eyes, holding out the single flower she had carried all the way. "This is for the brave man." The guards faltered for a moment, but training hardened their resolve again. "I'm sorry, sir. Please step aside." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The humiliation burned deep, not for himself, but for his daughter. He had faced bullets, shrapnel, and nightmares that clawed at his sanity. But nothing cut deeper than seeing his little girl watch him be turned away from honoring the man who had once meant everything to him. He wanted to argue, to shout, to demand they understand, but his voice broke before the words could come. He simply lowered his head, pulling Lily gently away from the gate. They stepped aside as black cars continued to roll past, men and women in expensive suits and shining medals sweeping through the gates without hesitation. Daniel stood there in silence, clutching his daughter's hand, feeling like an outcast in the very world he had once sworn to defend. He was a soldier no longer, just a forgotten veteran, invisible in the eyes of the powerful. And as the cold wind swept across the cemetery, Daniel whispered under his breath, almost too soft for anyone to hear, "I'm sorry, General. I tried." Lily looked up at him, her small hand squeezing his. "It's okay, Daddy. Maybe he can still see us, even from out here." But tears stung Daniel's eyes, but he forced a smile for her sake. He didn't want her to see his despair. He didn't want her to know how much it hurt. But deep inside, a storm was raging, a storm of grief, humiliation, and sorrow. Little did he know fate was already moving. Something was about to happen that would change everything. And so, chapter 1 closed not with triumph, but with silence. The silence of a father standing outside iron gates, holding his child close, unaware that soon those gates would open not just for him, but for a story that would shake every soul inside.